Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our series on raising Hashem's children, part 2. Those of you who didn't join the first time, there is a recording and you can get it. So in the same place that the live stream is available on irgantorah.org, you can find the dot. I think here we go. On Torah, you can find the recording of the first class. And we're going to continue this time with raising Hashem's children. Our part 2, we're going to focus on specifically the categories of love and joy. We have set a big goal for ourselves tonight, so we'll see how much we can get through. But I just want to make a disclaimer first, in case anyone doesn't get to watch old videos or participate in all the classes, is that sort of the class tonight and the class next time, Hashem, are kind of they're a peer. They're like what Chassidus would describe as two wings of the same bird. So we'll make some cross references, but I would just say that it would be very important to make sure to get both and not get a distorted half a story. Basically, like we're going to focus on one side, that doesn't mean we're not getting to the other side, which is equally critical. Okay. We mentioned at the end of last class that the mission statement of Dorashvi, of our generation, as per the Rebbe, which really can give us a sense of a mission statement for the chinuch of our children, is that there are 3 loves. There's Avos Hashem, Avos Torah, Avos Yisrael, and that they're intertwined. And we essentially translated that as a foundation of chinuch is recognizing that there needs to be love for the child, Avos Yisrael, real love, not self-love, right? Love as for you, because you're Hashem's child, and Avos Hashem, Avos Torah, love for Yiddishkeit. And the two coming together are really the most effective. So I want to build on that specific concept tonight. What does it mean, Avos Yisrael? What is this Avos Yisrael that the child needs that's essential to chinuch? And what is the Avos Hashem, Avos Torah that we're talking about? So obviously, as we spoke about last time, the starting point is our own perceptions, our own attitudes from the inside. It's not just about what we say and what we demonstrate. It's really how we look at Torah, as we discussed, the greatest gift, looking at the child as a neshama, right? It starts with our own pneumistic attitudes. And yet at the same time, it happens often that what's inside, what we're thinking, what we're feeling, doesn't always come out. So we want to elaborate more this time on ensuring that our children actually feel the Avos Yisrael and the Avos Hashem, Avos Torah. So first on the Avos Yisrael, again, I want to make a plug for learning the Rebbe's Sichos in the original, and the best compilation I found is in Teachings of the Rebbe on Chinuch, which really compiles just so many little excerpts from the tremendous volume of Sichos letters of the Rebbe on Chinuch. And we're really just going to go through several. Those who are here, we have a handout. If not, you can request it, we can get it to you. So we really just took a few short excerpts from the very, very many on the topic to kind of give us a little bit of a window into Torah's approach, specifically the Rebbe's approach to this topic of Avos Yisrael and Avos Hashem, Avos Torah, giving over the love that our children need. I want to start with a short piece from Likutei Sichos, where the Rebbe says something which I would assume to all of us is common knowledge, it's obvious, but it bears worth repeating, and with the weight of the Rebbe's words on it. Chinuch mutzlach shel yeladim harei kasher b'matzav ruach shelahem. Effective, successful chinuch of children is tied to their emotional state, to their matzav ruach, to how they are feeling overall emotionally. And where do they get that from? That the children feel and they see their mother going about her life and her day with a sense of inner peace and joy and satisfaction and calm and contentment. And she encourages them as well toward a happy, joyful life. So I want to pull that apart because that's a very loaded statement.
You say the statement again?
Sure. Effective, in short, effective and successful chinuch of children is tied to their emotional state, which is an outgrowth of them observing, in others in the positive, them observing their mother living her life in a happy, contented, calm, peaceful way that rubs off on the children and then affects their chinuch. So what do we mean by that? So right, the first part of this, that chinuch is tied to the emotional state. First of all, I want to make a clarification. I'm going to say this a few times. The love and emotional security and whatever we're talking about are not the chinuch itself. There's the love and emotional regulation and everything that is, and health and the relationship that's necessary in order for there to be chinuch. Chinuch still has to happen. And that's why I said, make sure to come to the next class. Often we kind of confuse, like, that's all you need to do. You just need to love your kids. No, that's not all you need to do. It's just the first thing you need to do, because otherwise we don't get anywhere. It's not possible to be mechanech a child without that foundation. But that itself isn't necessarily chinuch. You're not teaching the child. Okay, so the foundation, a critical foundation of chinuch, is tied to their emotional well-being. Why? Obviously we could explain that in many ways, but to state the obvious, parents are their children's model for the Eibishter. The whole idea of authority, that's where they get it from. Their first and primary attachment and authority is their parents, and however they view and experience their parents is really going to have a lot of bearing on how they experience the Eibishter. Beyond that, just in general, someone who is happy sees everything in a happy light. Someone who is unhappy, everything bothers them. Right? When we're like tired or hungry, and we'll get to more of that, or, we're sleep deprived, we're stressed out about whatever, suddenly every tiny little thing is a world crisis when it wouldn't have been otherwise, because it kind of, you just put on these lenses that make everything bad. A happy person, period, someone who's experiencing a happy life and is content with themselves, everything about their life is seen in a positive light, versus a child who's growing up unhappy, chas v'shalom. Even if there's no logical connection, we're not really logical beings. We have mayach shel ta'alalev, but that's a choice, that's an effort, that's an avodah. Naturally, instinctively, we're emotional beings. So however they're feeling, they can't figure out why I feel this way, why I feel that way. Does this have to do with Yiddishkeit? Does it not have to do with Yiddishkeit? If I'm growing up very simply in a frum home and I'm unhappy, so everything about my home is bad, and Rahman al-Islam, that includes the Yiddishkeit we're giving. So for there to be effective chinuch, a child has to be living a happy, healthy, wholesome life. They have to experience that their emotional needs are met. And what the Rebbe is saying here is that primarily that's a matter of reflecting the parents and specifically the mother's emotional state. Why the mother? That's why she's called the Akeres bayis, because she's the ikar of the home, and the child comes home from a stressful day, school, whatever else is going on. And if the child experiences my mother is kind of an anchor of peace and calm, this is a safe place, she's happy, it's like she envelops, we talk about women as malchus. Malchus isn't something active, it's like a container. She just becomes a container for everybody to kind of like plop into, like a comfortable couch, and now I feel comfortable. So that's only possible to the extent, it's not an all or nothing thing, right? But to the extent that the mother herself is at peace with her life, right? If the mother herself is stressed out, it's really kind of difficult for the children to experience home as a happy, welcoming, safe place. But if the mother is, there's really nothing greater she can contribute to her child's chinuch. It's not, what did you teach them? It's not about teaching, right? It's about being. This is the power of a woman. If I am content, if I've taken care of myself and I'm present and I'm happy and I have a positive attitude, that is one of the greatest gifts we can give a child, because then they mirror us, they're at peace, they are happy, and they're now receptive to anything that we're looking to impart to them, to share with them, to teach them, and they can really grow in a healthy way. And because of that, not because we deserve somehow, like, oh, we're giving so much time to our children, so we deserve time for ourselves, right? It's not like there's some sort of separate, like, oh, you deserve your self-care. It's critical from a perspective of chinuch, from a Torah perspective, it's critical that a mother takes care of herself. It's not extra. It's not like, oh, I can't afford to. If one of the most important things a child needs in their upbringing is a calm, peaceful, happy mother from whom they can absorb a healthy sense of self, emotional regulation, a feeling of safety, their own just calm oasis, then her getting to that place is really important and really for the benefit of everybody in her family. And obviously, everything, as the Rambam says, the middle path, derech hamitzua, we're not talking about extremes of anything, but sometimes there is a tendency mothers have, I think, to be martyrs, right? Like, somehow the fact that I'm going to say that it was so stressful and all the kids needed something and whatever justifies the fact that I didn't eat all day anything normal and I'm not sleeping and whatever. And like, yes, that's a reason, but that's like kids who come to school and say I was late because, or I didn't do my homework because, and I have lots of good excuses, but that still doesn't change the fact that it's not there. And honestly, is the child gaining from a mother who is depleted on a physical level, right? Like, can't nurse a child when you're not eating normally. I mean, what's the child getting? You can't physically care for a child when you're totally run down. At a certain point, you run out of gas. But more importantly, because you could push through lots of things, if the Rebbe is saying that the children's emotional state is so critical to their chinuch, and they get that from the mother, what atmosphere, what kind of feeling is the child absorbing if I'm a wreck? So yeah, I'm a martyr. So I gave them their physical needs and we made sure they had a good supper, and it's okay that I'm sufficing with rugelach or their leftovers or fill in the blank cereal and milk, blah, blah, what mothers do. Or that I'm running on no sleep and whatever. And I'm such a wonderful mother because I'm such a martyr, but like, are they getting a calm, peaceful mother? Now, for those who it works, like Yasher Koyach, they continue to have lots of koyach to be that way, but most people, I think, are a little more limited and know they cannot just run on no sleep, no healthy food for too long, and at some point it's going to come out. So beyond and everything else, which we're not getting into, simply in terms of the children, it's not like we're even benefiting them by ignoring our needs. Sometimes the most benevolent, the kindest, most selfless thing a mother can do is take a short break, if possible, obviously. Sometimes it's possible, sometimes it's not, but if at all possible, taking a break, go eat something nutritious. If you have the option, go take a nap. Right? It might at times, and of course everyone should have a mashpia and figure out which direction that they need to pull themselves more towards, but maybe my children need a calm and happy mother, and not seeing me for half an hour, it is less problematic for them than me snapping and screaming at them and being a stress ball, for example, right? It's really tuning into, I'm not the Eibishter, I'm not Kol Yochol, I'm not Ligvul, I'm limited, and what can I do, not to be perfect, but to try my best to be the kind of what the Rebbe describes here, Oisher Menuchas Nefesh, to have that sense of inner peace and calm that my children can really feed off of, which is so critical in their chinuch. And second point, which is very much connected to that, it's been expressed in different ways by different people. I've heard one expression that chinuch is 50% shalom bayis and 50% tefillah. Let's say 50% shalom bayis and 50% chinuch, whatever, there are lots of variations on the theme, but I want to read a few words from the Frierdiker Rebbe on the importance of shalom bayis in creating the kind of healthy emotional environment that our children need for their chinuch. Die gute und frumme chaye mishpacha. Good frum, meaning really frum, according benad lachavere and benadam lamakim, according to Torah, the kind of family life that Torah teaches us to have. mit edle Beziehungen, with refined, kind behavior and interactions between the man and Freud, the husband and wife, one to the other, is chutz dem was das is eine von den mitzvahs was Hashem Yisbarach hat uns mezake gewählt. Besides for the fact that obviously it's its own mitzvah, right? We get married not because we want to get something out of it, but Hashem wants us to build a Yiddish home and bring shalom into the world, and that's its own mitzvah. But since we're talking about chinuch, is das die beste undirekte Erziehung, was wirkt auf Kinder, es soll bei sie eingewurzelt werden, die beste Sitten midas Teufels. Indirectly is one of the most powerful pieces of a child's chinuch, because first of all, that's where they learn midas Teufels. That's they learn how to be a mensch, how to behave, how a yid behaves, is they're observing their parents full time. And we model, they see everything. So children pick up so much from the parents' relationship. If it's hopefully the way it should be according to Torah, it's respectful, it's kind, it's rises above ego and pettiness and is selfless, is they're working towards the same goal, right? There's something bigger beyond them. They see that, they see the conversations, they see the tone of voice, the language, the caring, doing for each other, and they learn so much. We can give lectures from today to tomorrow about how a yid is supposed to behave, what kind of midas they're supposed to have, but what do they see specifically in their parents' interaction with each other? And moreover, shalom bayis creates, if we're talking about a healthy, happy environment for the child to grow up in, shalom bayis is perhaps the most critical piece. Perhaps the most critical piece in creating the kind of healthy, happy environment that a child should grow up in for their own emotional health, is growing up in a wholesome home. Now, obviously, there's what we can do, there's what we can't do. And the Rebbe says, even when something is not perfect in the marriage and it's beyond our control, since we're focusing on the mother and she's the one who really sets the tone, the atmosphere, the emotional state of the home, she can choose her response and her state of being. She can choose to do what it takes to try to fill her emotional needs, in the sense that it may not be getting filled 100% in marriage because we never get everything we want from everybody, right? But she can see what she can do to keep herself happy and fulfilled and wholesome and content, and not just be sort of radiating her frustration and whatever's lacking there on the children. So we're not talking about like, oh no, if I don't have perfect shalom bayis and whatever, then who knows what's going to happen. Like the question is, what can I do about it? So obviously if there's something I could do, and there usually is in a normal situation, we're not talking about things that chas v'shalom would fall out of the pale of normal, but in a normal situation, there's always something I could do to make the shalom bayis better. It usually has something to do with getting over my ego, and we don't usually want to do that, but good old fashioned apologizing, and as the Rebbe says, taking the first step. Just a note in shalom bayis, the Rebbe says something very interesting, that often the regular problems in shalom bayis that really become quite exaggerated start from one partner perceiving that there's a lack of sentiment on the part of the other one. Like somehow we come to a conclusion that our spouse doesn't care about us, isn't happy, whatever, that they don't want to spend time with us or whatever. And like, then the other person backs away. And the whole thing that I've said often is a figment of the imagination. Each one's feeding off the other one. Like, just be the first one. You're married, build the relationship. So realizing that, I'll show it you after. It's an eternal joy. Eternal Joy, Volume 3. Eternal Joy there's Shidduchim, and then marriage, and then there's the whole Volume 3 is Shalom Bayis. Highly recommended reading, learning rather, but it's easy learning, not so easy applying. And just another comment on Shalom Bayis is that it's natural, I think, once we have children, to feel like the children are the priority. There's urgent and important. And the fact that something is more urgent doesn't always make it more important. So yes, it's possible that a young baby crying for food, meeting that need might be more urgent for this particular moment than spending time with their husbands, because we could talk, right? We're adults, we could figure out how to like rearrange our schedule. And obviously there's some things you can't reason with a newborn who's hungry. But we shouldn't make the mistake of making something less important just because it's not always as urgent. And shalom bayis is really, really important. Not least because of its impact on the chinuch of children. And somehow allowing the incessant demands and needs of children, which are real, to kind of take away from like, oh, well, like they have all these jokes of like, have your first child and be like, bye, see you in 25 years. It's not funny. It makes for good jokes for people who can't seem to get it together, but like, it's not okay. It's not an option. And if we recognize how critical of a piece shalom bayis is in the chinuch of our children, like then it's a priority. And just as we said, we have to make sure we're eating nutritious food and we're sleeping. Shalom bayis is a centerpiece, and it's not like it can wait. We can find all the excuses, but it's not an option. So again, like if that means we spend a little bit less time with them because we're spending time with our spouse, that's wholesome. That's in everyone's best interest, including the children, and there should be no guilt. Like this is good for them more than another whatever we're going to do with them, that they're growing up in of course you can feel with this. Sometimes you could fake, there's respect, we could tolerate each other, but children need more than that. And a child can sense my parents care for each other, they like each other, they're a team. There's that warmth that a child can feel that's so reassuring, it's so secure, it's so really emotionally nourishing, that we owe it to our children to do whatever we possibly can to give that to them. And at times it means just deciding this is a priority, this is in the schedule. It happens, we're working on our shalom bayis even as we're raising young children, not sort of waking up years later and wondering what happened. So we had two pieces so far in helping create the kind of emotionally healthy, happy environment that our children really need to be able to grow up properly and get the chinuch they need. One is paying attention to our mood and our needs, and what do I need to be able to be a calm, happy mother as much as I can. Again, we're not going to be perfect. There'll be times we'll be stressed out, but it's important to be conscious that our children don't benefit very much from our stress and can be hurt by it. The most obvious example would be if we let out, as the famous expression, that when it comes to Pesach, that dust is not chametz and children are not the carbon Pesach. And too often our children become the carbon Pesach, or the carbon lots of things, the carbon for Shabbos, the carbon for Yom Tov, the carbon for whatever other mitzvahs we're doing. And it's really hard then to go on and raise a child to appreciate that mitzvah that we kind of let out our stress on them. So recognizing that it's difficult, we then say, is there something I can do? Is there some way I can reorganize things, try to take a short break and let out my stress in a healthier way than venting on them or whatever? Because us creating a happy, healthy, calm environment by way of our own emotional state is really going to rub off on the child in a tremendous way. And number two, like we said, shalom bayis, them growing up in a united, healthy, happy home. One more point on this topic, and obviously we could spend all night on it, is having said that, right, we've set a general foundation of there being a healthy atmosphere and healthy vibes coming across. But more than that, specifically, the Rebbe says it's really important that we develop a relationship with our children. One beautiful source, little piece I found on this amongst many, the Rebbe talks about Chana, the mother of Shmuel. We've heard many things about it, I'm sure, learned about it. Chana stayed home for the first 2 years after she finally had this child that Hashem benched her with. Even though she had many important things to do, busy things to do, she was this big shlucha who used to go to Shilai every year, and they would take a different route to Shilai, constantly go off this way, go off that way, and people would say, where are you going? And Elkanah was a rich man, so they'd come with a whole entourage, and it made a big scene. So, what's going on? Everyone would ask, they'd be like, we're going to Shilai. What? You've never been to Shilai? Are you kidding? Come along with us. And each town they stopped in, they'd be taking along more people, and they had a whole group showing up to the Beis Hamikdash Ola Regel. So it was like a really big shluchos each year, and she would say Nevuah. She was one of the Nevias. And then she has this child and she says, I'm sorry, I'm not going. Why? Because she's there to bond with her child at those most critical first 2 years. And she says, my child needs me now. And then the Rebbe points out something interesting that happens later. After 2 years, since she had promised this child, right, when she had asked Hashem for a child, she said, I'm going to give him to you to serve, to fully be devoted to service of Hashem. So she comes when he's weaned and she gives him to Eli in the Mishkan. And she uses the expression that I'm giving Hashem my child. Hish'iltihu is given two different translations. Either I'm lending him, I've loaned him to Hashem, she says, or I'm gifting him to Hashem. The Rebbe explains where those two explanations come from. But from the Lashon, I lend him to Hashem, the Rebbe teaches a very interesting lesson. Why did she only loan him to Hashem? She says she gave him up, right? She brought him to the Mishkan, and here you are. You're going to be a Navi, and tremendous accomplishments for Klal Yisrael. But the Rebbe says that a mother never ends her connection with her child. So she only loans him even to the Eibishter because he's still her child forever. And we learn about the Kesher Tmidi, about the constant, everlasting connection that a mother needs to have with her child, even as they become an adult, even as they go off on their own, which means if that's ultimately, right, even as they grow and they get older and they become independent, that there's a bond that never gets severed and that always really remains very deep. Where does it start from? Right, obviously it starts from the way she built it in the first place, those first 2 years really bonding with the child, and then you build on that connection forever. There's a certain element of attachment. Attachment is a very, popular idea in parenting these days, and without referring to any specific, practices, or, we could argue from today to tomorrow about all kinds of parenting strategies and what's right and what's wrong and how you should sleep train and whatever, and we're not going there. But the essential idea that the early years of a child's life are a time for a parent to bond with their child in a meaningful way are indisputable. We see that from Hannah. And that it's not just about for that period of time we bond. The point is to create a lifelong bond that continues. And it's not necessarily something that happens just by default. It just kind of happens. That's not the way it works, right? There is a natural love. There's a natural connection and feeling that a parent will have for a child, but it's not always going to be developed the way it needs to. There are many things that can come up and block it, and it needs to be nurtured, right? So there are ways we build attachment, and Torah teaches us that love comes from giving, not the opposite, right? It's not that we give to someone or do for them because we love them, but how does it happen that a parent develops a bond with a child the more you give to them, right? If you're waking up night after night, multiple times feeding a child, at a certain point, you just feel attached, even if you didn't feel this, like halo upon giving birth. I'm still waiting to meet those who do, but yes, you feel this responsibility. This is my child. It's awesome. But not always do you feel that attachment right away, but it builds. You give and you give and you give and you give, and you really connect to them. So how do we build that kind of connection to our child that they always feel hishiltio, that no matter what, when we send them off to school, when they become an adult, that they're always ours, and there's always that safe connection, especially with the mother, that's there to come back to, which is so critical in chinuch. And so many people have spoken about the challenges children and youth go through, and there's no question one of the greatest things we can do for our children that can help them in all areas of life is give them that healthy connection, that they feel like my mother's always there for me. She's not perfect. She doesn't do everything perfectly, but I know she's really there for me. And I know that I can come and tell her anything. I know that if there's something I need, she'll always be there for me, not just on a practical level, first of all, right? There's that security practically that a child develops from the beginning. I'm hungry. I know my needs will be met. Whatever physically I need, my mother will take care of me. She's responsive. But more than that, emotionally, I know that if something's troubling me, she will listen. She'll empathize. She'll be supportive. She won't judge. She's a safe person I can talk to. That doesn't just happen automatically. That's a conscious effort that we make, but it's so critical. And I want to just say a few practical things on that. on that note, some starter conversations on that. One is that some children, it's easier for parents to connect to than others. Some of them may be a more natural fit with our personality. We kind of get them, we get each other, it works. We like the things that they like. We might be artistic and they're artistic, or we like reading and they like whatever it is, and it's easier to bond with them. And then there are inevitably those children that it's not as natural because the way they need to connect is not really our comfort zone. So it means developing an appreciation for doing the kind of activities which maybe we don't naturally want to do on a very basic level as an adult, learning to like just sit and play baby toys and children toys, which doesn't necessarily come as easily to everybody, but building a connection means on their level, right, in a way that they feel bonded, and a little child is not feeling bonded by adult conversation. So it means really noticing the child, as the Friedrich Rebbe talks so much in Kloli Chinuch V'Hadracha, knowing the specific child that we're dealing with. They're all different. What's their personality like? What are their needs? How can I develop a connection and an attachment, a relationship with them on their terms? It can't be on my terms. It has to be on their terms. So if it's a child that likes to do puzzles, I might do puzzles with them. If it's a child that needs to roughhouse and is tumbling all over, like I need to figure out how to do some of that and enjoy it, because I still remember one of my children's wonderful preschool teachers. At one point, who's still teaching, and she should have a lot of hatzlacha. I still remember that he came home and told me that this particular mora is his favorite mora. So I said, why? And he tells me, because mora so-and-so, she laughs when the kinderlach say funny things. I thought that was so deep. He was like 3.5. It was so telling. It was like, you could do the right things. You could take care of your child, but they sense, do you get a kick out of me? Do you think I'm funny? Do you like spending time with me? And that builds their connection. So, it's not just like, oh, I'm there, I'm taking care of you. It's like, there's that bonding there of like, aha, I get you, and that spark. And sometimes it really requires effort to do that. Some people are naturally baby people, and then maybe they'll struggle when their kids get older, how to relate to them as teenagers. And some people are the opposite, like, you connect to like adults, like what do you do with little kids? And it requires constant thought. And we talked about what the Rebbe Hashems said about thinking half an hour a day about the chinuch of our children. At times we need to stop and reflect, like, what is my child's personality? Am I bonding with them? Am I connecting with their personality? If not, what can I do to get there? How can I get into their zone? There could be multiple interests that they have, or ways of doing that, but it requires saying not just like, oh, this is what works for me, but how do I get into their head and their heart and really be there, that they feel like I'm enjoying their presence, is so important. There's also, I've personally found it helpful, the concept, which maybe they'll discover there are more, but so far the idea that they have they've categorized 5 love languages I found to be very helpful. Whether there are 5, whether there are more or less, doesn't matter. The point is there are multiple languages of love, and usually we have a comfort zone in some of them, and we are not as comfortable in others. And as we mentioned last time, inevitably we're going to have children, and probably our spouse also, who have love languages that are not ours. So we could get stuck and say, well, this is what works for me. You should feel loved because, do you know how, I make your favorite supper, and I do so much for you, and I this and I that and the other, but like, it's very nice that you should feel a certain way, but if you don't, it's really kind of irrelevant. Meaning, yes, I should continue doing what I'm doing, but feelings are the child's feelings. So the question is, do they feel what's in our heart? The fact that I really love you, child, whoever you are, but you don't feel it just doesn't help enough. And often it's simply a matter of expression, meaning, let's say the feelings are there. Maybe I really am working on appreciating the child, on recognizing their milas, on kind of noticing what they're good at and really learning to appreciate them. But if it's not coming across, then I need to work on that. And sometimes it means learning a new language. And the good news is that it's possible. It is definitely possible to learn a new language, but it requires effort, right? You could be the person who comes to a foreign country and 30 years later is still not speaking the language because you're afraid to learn it and just like, well, you can't learn your old age. You could be that way. Or you could say, listen, this is life and I'm going to adapt and I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to make mistakes along the way. It's going to feel really awkward. I'm going to start saying sentences that won't make sense. I'm going to use like Lashon HaKodesh from the Torah instead of conversational Hebrew, and I'll sound like who knows what, right? Like, that's okay. We're going to do that. And then I'm going to be able to communicate. And the same thing is with our children, of course, in a marriage also, but I'm not discussing that specifically. So some of us, for example, it could just be our personality, or it could be the way we grew up. It doesn't matter that some things are more natural, some things are less. So some people, let's say, are less verbally affectionate. Some people are less physically affectionate, right? It doesn't come as naturally to them, but the child needs it. So they don't know how I feel about them, and they're actually waiting for me to tell them affectionate words, or they need the hug. And the fact that it's uncomfortable for me doesn't make it less of a need on the part of the child. There's a great book they put out by Hachai, I Love You, My Dear. It's so sweet. So it really kind of like gives parents affectionate language to, you read it to your child. And if you're not that type of mushy person, you kind of get used to talking. I'm reading the book, but the child's hearing you say that and, gives you ideas of how to be that way. But like, just do it, right? Just, if you need to, take the mirror and practice in front of the mirror, saying the kind of things that, you feel maybe are too mushy, but like, it's never, a child can never get spoiled by hearing, I love you and all kinds of, you light up our house and whatever other wonderful things we can tell them. We're definitely not spoiling them that way. We can spoil them with the other things that are easier to give, the stuff. But the things they really need often come a little more difficult, and we can work on it, and we just push ourselves. I'm gonna give it to you because it's your language. For some children, it is the gifts, right? And then if we're not a gift person, then thinking about how we can some of that, leave little notes for them, whatever, on and on, service, etc. Right? It's not all technically what we feel like doing and like, oh, this is my comfort zone of giving, but rather, are my child's needs for feeling love, are they being met in their language? And I would just add one more thing, and then we have a question here. I've noticed that one of the easiest ways to pick up what a child's emotional needs are, what their language is by noticing, unfortunately, what they fetch about. Because what they fetch about means I need it and I'm not getting it. Obviously, we don't want to wait till they fetch, right? But if we're not sure, it's pretty obvious. And by the time they're fetching for it, either by you never, right? Or they're just like kind of nudging at us and like obviously looking for our attention. That's kind of like, it's a little late, but it's not too late. And I've also found it helpful to recognize that giving a child what they need in response to them fetching for it doesn't really fill them up. Because I begged for it, so you gave it to me, but it's kind of like saying, like, could you please buy me a birthday present? I really want this, and if I harass you 7 times, you'll buy it for me. How good do I feel afterwards? Like, I got what I wanted, but I didn't get what I wanted, right? I wanted you to want to give it to me, or to notice that I needed it, or to think of it, or whatever, and to feel nourished by it. And that nourishment is not coming because I took it. I didn't receive it. There's a very big difference between the two. So when we notice that our children are nudging for our attention, it's just like, oh, hey, like, no, they actually need our attention. And or whatever else that they're fetching about, the best thing we could do is preempt that in the future and offer it without them asking, without them having to beg and nudge, like freely offer it. And it's so much more nourishing for anybody to receive something freely than to have to go and beg. And so in short, as the Frierdiker Rebbe says, really knowing our child's personality, their temperament, their particular language, etc., really can help us get pause and say, listen, of course I love my children. Am I making sure to demonstrate that to them in a way that they can really feel it, absorb it, and appreciate it. Yeah.
Kids like don't really express like what they need. So it's like, hold me on your
Right.
Yeah, like even if it's no parents say.
Right. That's a good question. Young babies. First of all, I would say there are certain things that are universal.
Sometimes
Sure.
they like really like, I mean, my son, every time he sits down to play, mommy, come play with me, come play
Right.
with me, come play with me, like.
Right. Like usually they'll tell us in a way that's obvious if we start noticing it, like they can get nudgy about certain things. Generally, I mean, the fact that Hashem created that way, that all children are born with a certain need for touch, that's pretty basic. Yes, you can have a child who has reflux and whatever and is resisting it. That doesn't mean they don't need it. It's like, unfortunately, they can't handle it, or sensory overload and all those kind of issues. But essentially, every person is born with that need for touch. And so we always want to make sure that we're offering that. And if we're not sure, we should be trying to offer all of them. But yes, we're going to notice, even starting a young child, that they're schlepping at us to kind of like just be present, like push, like get the phone out of there, look at me. I still remember, I remember even as a little kid, one of my children was constantly going like, cuck, like just nudging and like just starting to talk, like look at me, like literally stare at my eyes. And it was like so obvious. I mean, eye contact. I don't care that you're here, I don't care what you, eye contact. It was like, look at me. Then there was another child at a young age who was always like plopping themselves on my lap, or like reaching out, halti hentily, hold my, just reaching, like just grab my hand, always like touch me. So I think our children talk pretty loudly, even at young ages. And we can sense what they really crave and offer them more. But if we're not sure, it never hurts to offer all five. Yeah.
Today, like I was really wondering in the dining room with her, and she was like pulling on a stretch. So,
there you go. Right. How old? 12 months, right? Pulling at our skirt. It's like literally like, I want your attention. And sometimes we realize like, it's kind of like when we don't have gas and we're driving and we're like, feel like we'll push it a little longer and then we just end up in trouble. Like sometimes you think I don't have the time, and sometimes all the child needs, maybe depending on the age, is even 10 minutes of focused attention. Stop. The world's not going to fall apart. Supper or whatever will be 10 minutes later. 10 minutes, be fully present, and then they're filled up and they're okay afterwards. Otherwise, we have this fetchy child for 2 hours, and it's not a matter of them making our life difficult. The point is the child is feeling deprived, and their emotion is not met for 2 hours, where we could have just sort of given them in the first place. We think like, oh no, like I don't have all afternoon. No, they don't necessarily need all afternoon, but they really do need their time. One more like just little piece that I personally found helpful is a child knowing that you have your special time with mommy, and it doesn't have to be a tremendous amount, even if it's 5 minutes. Some kids, it could be the afternoon, sometimes it could be bedtime, depending what works for us. But a child knowing this is your special time, no one is allowed to interfere. It's like, and it's official. It's like we could have given them 15 minutes before, but somehow them knowing like right now is your official 5 minutes. You can do whatever we want. We could play something. We could, you decide what we're doing. And it's really just bonding time, and it's yours. Is something that really can help a child feel, no matter how many children there are and what's going on, that I'm a priority in my parents' life. And importantly, builds a personal connection, personal attachment, that as they grow older, there's a real open, developed bond with the mother that as we talked about Hannah, that they're building on. And of course, there's so many other pieces to that, but I think that sets a basic foundation of the kind of basic elements we want to think about, that the more we are creating a healthy atmosphere in terms of our own emotional health, our mood, paying attention to our mood, shalom bayis, and developing personal relationships with our children, each of our children, we're setting a healthy, happy foundation that allows them to grow in a secure way, in a happy way, and then the rest of chinuch kind of becomes possible. So that's piece one. Building on that, the Rebbe talks a lot about, and we see this a lot in Kloli Chinuch V'Hadracha, The importance of then the chinuch. We discussed the love itself is not the chinuch. Love is the love. They need love, obviously Yisrael. But then we want to transmit our values. We want to be mechanech them. That too, the Rebbe says, should ideally come primarily and as much as possible from a place of love and positivity. And I say primarily because, of course, there is the concept of smol daicha, and we'll discuss that next time in Be'ez Hashem, where the place for that is and what that means, and how even the smol daicha, there could be a positive way of doing it, right? But at times we need to teach our children what to do, and we need to set boundaries, and there needs to be kabbalah soil, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to look a little bit about what the Rebbe says about prioritizing a loving, positive approach in the way we deal with the children, right? We're giving them that love, but then what happens when we actually have to get them to, it's very nice to play with them on the floor when there's nothing to do and we're playing, but now we have to get them to go to bed, or we have to get them to behave, we have to get them to do lots of things. And how do we ensure that what is kind of natural doesn't happen, which is that in having to manage their lives practically, we end up really just policing them and bossing them around. So, we could try all we want to create a happy atmosphere, but like, it's not, I guess grandparents can afford to do that. But at the end of the day, when you're raising a young child, you have to get them to brush their teeth and get them to eat supper and get them to this and get them off to school. And what can end up happening, despite the best of intentions, is we're basically bossing them around all day. Do this, do this, do this, do this. That doesn't come across very loving. And of course, they don't always want to do what we think they should be doing. And then we have issues. And that's what really chips away at this loving bond that we're trying to create. And we're like, what am I supposed to do? So first of all, just one introduction before I read this first source here. There's an expression, an idea that I find very helpful, and that is the concept of a relationship bank account. Thinking of our relationships with our children as a bank account that you put in deposits and you make withdrawals. And as they say, are you in the black or are you in the red, right? When the numbers on the statement show up in red, that means you have withdrawn more than you have deposited and you're in trouble. We want to stay in the black. We want to make sure at very minimum, because we're going to make withdrawals and we'll try to make them as gentle as possible, but we want to make sure we have what to withdraw. So when we're making enough positive deposits, when we're investing as much as possible in the loving relationship and the connection, and even talk about even as we're going about our chinuch, doing it in a positive way, we're depositing and depositing and depositing. And then if we need to make a withdrawal of some sort, then there's what to build on. The child knows my mother loves me, my father loves me. It comes from love. It's what we would call gvura shebachesed. It's gvura, it's boundaries coming from a place of love. They can accept that because their overall feeling is, my parent cares about me, my parent understands me, my parent loves me. Okay, so this is why they're telling me or whatever, or not allowing me to, et cetera, et cetera. So the Rebbe says like this, in many ways, is just one example, that the avodah of chinuch, especially in our generation, needs to be mitoch kiruv, needs to be really primarily from a positive place, from a loving place, yamin mekareves. It says smol doiche, that the left hand pushes away, and yamin mekareves, the right hand draws near. Yamin meaning, yamin always, the right is generally the stronger side. You have some people who are lefties, so no offense, but generally the right represents stronger. Most people, the right side is stronger, so that's why we do a mitzvah with the right hand. And the bulk of our energy, the majority of the emphasis, mekareves, is supposed to be on the positive. And in this case, we're talking about really emotional energy as well as time, meaning we want to pay attention to how many interactions do we have with our children? How often do we talk to them during the day? Short conversations, telling them something. And it's pretty sobering if we would start counting, like how many statements have I made to my child today? How many of them were positive statements? How many were negative? And in negative, we're going to include instructions, which are not bad, but to a certain extent, like there's one time you can boss someone around and they feel loved, right? So, neutral to negative, any type of criticism, any type of instruction and telling off, right? You have all of those. And how many positive statements do I make? It's usually pretty sobering to notice them. Do the same thing in your marriage. It's a good idea. Right? Any complaint, any frustration, all that goes in the negative. Unfortunately, the negativity bias is such that human beings will usually overwhelmingly focus on the negative. So I'm not going to say if something is good, I'm going to say if something is not good, right? And our children will mirror that they're also going to do that, right? Unless we teach them otherwise. And if anything, we want the opposite. We want not even, because the same negativity bias leads the listener to hear the negative more and hear the positive less. So if I would say an equal number of loving, positive statements as negative statements, the person's going to feel it was overwhelmingly negative, right? We tend to remember the incidents from our childhood that were not so good, or we didn't perceive as such, right? And those kind of like get outsized proportion, and the good things that happen, they just kind of like get lumped, yeah, whatever. Like it was okay, but I just remember this like one horrible incident. That's just the way the brain unfortunately works. So if we want our children to experience our interactions with them and our relationship with them as positive, we kind of need to do a lot more positive than the opposite, which is a really conscious effort. Okay, so Yamin Makarevis, the right hand, the extra, the more time, the more energy going to Yamin, to the positive. And only afterwards, only after we've invested and really worked hard at Mikarevis, can there be a place for thinking about small daicha, which we'll get to next time. What does that mean, and what does that include? When a child needs to, is displaying behavior or tendencies that are not appropriate, and we do need to teach them, and it's not working through the positive, then you consider what is the alternative, but not before we've really invested in the positive side, which should usually fix most things. But as the Rebbe says, even if there is a place for small daicha, even if there's a place for telling a child that that's not acceptable or whatever, not with the same chayas, not with the same energy, the passion, the mesiras, the stir, not with that whole investment. What happens often is when we're upset, which has a problem, comes from we're upset, right? But the child misbehaves and we need to tell them that that was not okay. We are personally emotionally invested. I'm angry. I'm disappointed. I'm upset. And the child hears that. There's a whole emotional vibe they're getting. And then we pat ourselves on the back when we say something positive, like, just gives a sort of half-hearted compliment, like, great job, doesn't compete very much with how could you, and what, the child's not hearing words necessarily, even once they understand words. They feel very much the energy we're giving off. So instead of naturally giving off the energy in the negative, and then, I said the right thing, we really, it's a conscious effort that practice makes better, that we can really think about, like, am I saying the positive with drama? Am I saying the positive with excitement and emotional investment? And if there is something I need to say, like, now is not the time for whatever, it's time to go to bed, kind of doing that neutral. But
I feel like sometimes we a bit more also matter of fact, the positive.
Right. Right. So a lot of it, that's true. Saying if it sounds more natural, they might believe it more than it's embellished. I would add that we're not talking about exaggerating, meaning saying you're the biggest, you're the world's greatest artist because they drew some colors and the child knows that's a little ridiculous, doesn't get them very far, right? We want to be honest about what we say, but with passion, just with that tone of voice that shows I'm really excited. Like, that's really colorful. I didn't say anything, but or I see you're playing really nicely. I see you're sharing. I'm not saying more than that. I'm saying the truth exactly as it is without embellishment, but I'm saying it with a tone of voice that radiates excitement, not just like, glad you're playing nicely, and then we're like, what? How could you take away from whoever, as opposed to the opposite. Like, if we do need to, we talk about discipline, but if we need to say something like it's not acceptable to take away someone's toy or whatever, like, that's with a neutral tone of voice. That's just like, this is the way it is. But the look who's mevater, look who just shared with, your brother, what a mitzvah. And, we give off that energy. I think that's what I was talking about. It's really that tone of voice and the emotional energy that comes across the shturim.
Like, sometimes they'll leave something off, like, it'll resonate more in the calm way.
Right, exactly. Exactly. And we're going to, exactly, precisely. And that's what we're going to get to next time, that it actually, in addition to harming the child, it defeats our whole purpose when we stick our emotional, right? It becomes like, okay, let's wait till that crazy lady stops screaming, and it has nothing to do with me, 100%. We're really just radiating to them that we're personally offended, and we don't get anywhere 100%. So it's not like it's even, there's a benefit, but there's a risk. It's like, there's no benefit, but we do have to tell them, well, sometimes, and we'll get there. But the first effort is like, am I investing in the positive? And what's so amazing is that often we don't end up needing the negative if we do the positive right, because positive reinforcement, which is what I want to get to next, that you have on the next page here. I'm going to skip to the second paragraph for a moment. I'll get back to the other one. In Klolei Chinuch V'Hadracha, the Frierdiker Rebbe describes the role of positive reinforcement, specifically praise, in chinuch, and how powerful it is, how it's one of the tools of the trade of a mechanech. It's just like, like a goldsmith and a shoemaker or whatever, and everyone has their tools of their trade, or the graphic artist has their computer. So what are the tools of the trade of a mechanech? One of those critical tools is praise. So ahil behashevach magbias hamechunach v'hamudrach, the really just glorifying, praising the child. What does it do? It lifts up the mechunach and the mudrach. It lifts up the child that we're looking to educate. To lift them out of the state and the situation that they're in. Like, they're kind of stuck right now. They're feeling selfish. They're feeling trapped. They're feeling like they need to assert themselves, whatever they're stuck in, right? And our kids get very stuck. We all get stuck. It just frees them. It lifts them out of that place and places them on a higher pedestal. Like, we literally just put them somewhere higher. And now from that vantage point, like being on an airplane, they can look back and be like, that's petty. I can do things differently. Higher than they were initially. And really just getting that positive feedback is so rewarding and encouraging for the child that it just gives them the impetus, the push to do what they need to do. Always. And obviously it's easier before something happened. But like, I've noticed, and I'm learning, like we all do as we go along. And sometimes there's something that you could say the negative many times and just be like, don't do this, or we don't, whatever. And really, we're just calling attention to the negative behavior, which in a certain sense is like a, what do you call it? Joke. They're all right. There are all kinds of quirks and nervous twitches and whatever that people can have, right? And the problem, let's say, your kid is doing this, and then, right? Or some other kind of twitch. What? Right, like a tick, right? So if you point it out, they're going to do it more, right? So you have to deal with the underlying anxiety. You can't point it out, but the truth is, any kind of bad behavior is really that kind of tick. Because as the Rebbe says in that first source that we just missed, why does Yemin Makarevis work? Because we recognize that that's not the child's essence to do the wrong thing. Our child's a neshama. Getting back to last time, they are chelik elikam mal. They're neshama. They want to do the right thing. If they're misbehaving, it's because the Yetzer Hara got in the way. It's not their fault. It's the Yetzer Hara's fault, right? The Yetzer Hara is making trouble. So we look at the Yetzer Hara as the other. We just need to kind of get him out of the way, but that doesn't need the extra energy because that's not them, right? The reason it works to just encourage the positive is because it resonates with them. I really do want to do the right thing, right? So just point that out. Just help me find that place. And so when it's a question of, do I want to do this or do I want to do that? And I'm feeling selfish, instead of feeling like, oh no, I have this massive problem, it's like, no, really just encourage the good side that's really actually them. So if we point out the negative, like the twitch, it kind of like the kid just starts feeling like, okay, so I'm a liar, I'm a troublemaker, I'm a something. They give themselves that label. It's much harder to get out of it versus when we tell a child, you're so generous how you share, we've defined them as a sharing child. We've defined them as a mavater. and as a gibar and whatever, that's how they start seeing themselves. They really want to live up to it. I recently had this incident that was very powerful that I want to share. And again, thank one of my children's teachers. I don't know if they want to be called out, so I'm not mentioning their names. But one of my children came home from school with a toolbox, literally a toolbox, a classic toolbox, and it was the Yiddishkeit toolbox. The Yiddishkeit toolbox contained the kind of tools you use when you need to overcome your Yetzer Hara. What kind of tools were there? So there were all different like little crafts and things that represented, this represented something that ashtacha pratis. So I think about ashtacha pratis. One was bitachon. There was gibar ka'ari, being strong as a lion there against the Yetzer Hara, of course. There was my connection to Hashem represented by a rope. There was a picture of the Rebbe. I'm going to think about the Rebbe's looking how I'm acting, and several other things that I can't recall at the moment, a few things like that. And obviously she had taught them about all these ideas. And I'm like, oh, that's really nice and sweet. Like, that's so beautiful. Okay. And so then we're working with this child on specifically, of all things, trying to not throw tantrums, which is a little difficult, like in her emotional regulation, and just, if you're very frustrated or disappointed, we use our words and we work it out. We do not have meltdowns. And somehow everything I was doing wasn't working. It was just not, wasn't sticking. It was like somehow anything that worked with any other child was not working with this one. And it was like, how do you, the more we were paying attention to, you can't do this, and it wasn't. So at some point we just said, okay, we're going to take the approach of encouraging when she's not throwing a tantrum. Now, normally you don't think of encouraging not throwing a tantrum. What did she do? She didn't do anything, right? Like, was there to compliment exactly? But it was like noticing that for the child, any moment that they're even acting acceptable is a victory, right? They could be, clearly things tick them off. So how do you, recognize it? Don't take anything for granted. But especially if you notice the child's a little bit frustrated or starting to get frustrated, like how much more so, right? So we started really just going around and putting the emphasis not on like, oh, now you threw a tantrum, so now what are we going to do about it? But on preventing it through the positive. So it was like, look who's using her words, and I'm so proud of you for calming yourself down by yourself. And I see that you're really disappointed, but you're not throwing a tantrum, like literally like that, with the recognition that kind of went on in my brain of like, hold on, for the child, that's a big deal. Like, it deserves to be recognized. That's actually a victory if they are not throwing a tantrum. Stop going like, no, well, they should be. So until they're perfect, I'm somehow not going to give you the satisfaction of a compliment until you're at what? Child's a child, right? Where they're at. And it was magical, really, how everything just started to turn around, because it was like, wait, my parents see me as the child who controls herself. So like, I'm going to do that because I have to live up to that, even if I saw it coming. So like, especially as I saw a tantrum about to start and the kid's already on the floor, I'm like, but she didn't start screaming yet, right? It's not kicking yet. So I'm going like, I see someone's really disappointed, but not letting the Yetzer Hara win, and she's not throwing a tantrum. Well, she didn't yet, right? So that's the fact. And like, that was the end. The tantrum did not come. But what was fascinating is, so at one point, one of us must have said something like, because she just turned 6. So one of us must have said something like, looks like you must be 6 now because you're just acting so mature. She got really upset. So I'm trying to like what, say we did something wrong there. And then so she comes over and says, I don't like when you say it's because I'm 6. It's because of this. Like, what's this? And she pulls out the toolbox. No joke. Pulls out her toolbox and says, even if I don't open it, I think about it. It's not because I'm 6. I think, give me more credit than that. I'm working on this. I think about what's in the toolbox. I think about this. I could really use all the tools in my toolbox. I could use about this. I could use bitachon, that I have bitachon that Hashem will help me not throw a tantrum. I use hashtacha pratis, that I think like whatever happened that I'm upset about is hashtacha pratis. I'm not kidding. And I think I could be a Geber, and the Rebbe is watching me and looking how I'm acting, and I'm connected. She goes through all of them, and that helps me. So she's sitting there on the floor, and I could be like, look who's giving a mad face. And meanwhile, the kid's seriously battling out her Yetzer Hara, right? She really feels like throwing a tantrum, and she's doing Havaita in her head, I'm like, I'm gonna control I'm not gonna do this, and when we just step back from like, somehow we're not perfect, it's okay, we're not perfect, but our children, how could they possibly not be perfect? And we're gonna catch them at every possible mistake, and instead recognize like the child wants to be good. The Yetzer Hara, we also have a Yetzer Hara, right? Makes it really difficult, and they're trying to control it, and they deserve credit for every effort they make, and assuming, again, starting from a place of, if you behaved, I know it's because you wanted to do the right thing, and the Yetzer Hara makes it difficult, and you deserve credit for not listening. And if it is getting in your way, again, it's like, I know you want to do the right thing, so I'm going to help you do it, right? It starts sort of like in our shift of what we think about the child and what we believe they want to do. And then we start noticing the positive. That's like, I know that's who you want to be. So like, I'm going to notice that. And they really just start doing more of it. And that's the Yamin Mekareves. And we end up with a lot less to get upset about or even have to point out, because we gave them so much, and it's so much more effective. Like Friedrich Rebbe says, it's just, it lifts them up. It's so much more effective to use the positive reinforcement. Something I've noticed that's helpful is like milk the positive reinforcement. So if we're giving it to them, make it public, usually can't go wrong unless you have a particularly shy child. Say it in front of Tati, do you know who just whatever, and tell them all the wonderful things. And if there are other kids around and they don't want, let everybody know what they did, call up Bubby and this one and that one, depending what the action was and right, and how big of a deal it was for them. You can get lots of mileage out of the same positive action and compliment. And that same child who lied, who knows how many times, like one time said the truth when it was inconvenient, that's a huge victory, right? Like make a whole, don't be like, oh, whatever, okay, it's good you don't lie this time. Like, no, hold on, like the child just was victorious over their struggle. So like give them the credit for that. And it's incredible how that Yamin Mekareves, how emphasizing the positive just changes the whole dynamic, and the child wants to live up to that. Like my parents consider me somebody who works really hard to tell the truth, and it's like gives them that strength the next time. And they clearly get the message, what's right, what you're supposed to do, but they heard it in the positive, and it's more likely to manifest itself that way. One more piece, and then it will open for questions and leave this part for next time. Just one more thing about Yamin Mekareves that I've mentioned specifically, although the pasuk originally says smol doiche and then Yamin Mekareves, that when it comes to children, however, by a tinoik, from the context it appears, doesn't just mean like literally a newborn baby, a child. By a child, the Yamin Mekareves darf kommen fahren smol doiche. The Yamin Mekareves has to come first. Und wie Mezetes bemuchash soll gehen zum Tinik früher mit smol doiche can as im Ganzen wegstoppen for learning. It doesn't work with young children, so or children at all. It's not that there doesn't need to be, and again, disclaimer, right? We'll talk about Yerushalayim and Kabbalah Sale, and that's really important. But what do we offer first, right? The way Hashem created is that first we develop a loving bond with the child. First, we give them positivity. First, we allow them to experience the joy of Shabbos. 2-year-old already knows that Shabbos has something to do with grape juice, and like that's the association. You may not really get what he's not allowed to do, but we get kiddush and we get chips, whatever it is, like those associations, we get to first, and it should be that way, that first we develop happy, positive, loving associations. First is the Yamin Mekareves. First, we're playing with them or we're complimenting them. That should always be first. It's not the fallback option. It's the first option. And whatever small daicha has to happen comes, if necessary, after that. Again, we filled up the bank account, we don't make the withdrawals first. If we need to make some sort of withdrawal, it's having set a foundation of positivity first. Because I think we're going to run out of time, I'm going to take a few minutes and just briefly get to the last point. And that is joy for Yiddishkeit. So we had so far an emotionally healthy, happy, loving bond that we're working on with our children, specifically in our chinuch interactions with them, trying to do it in a positive, loving way, and how much more effective and healthy, obviously, that is. It's so much easier, by the way, when we actually do it, that like we wonder each time why we don't, but somehow we're just, we're not crazy. We are predisposed to notice the negative and do things in a negative way, but it goes so much easier the other way. And then the last piece in this, we talk about Avos Yisrael, right? Those are about the Avos Yisrael with which we do our chinuch, or that's the foundation of our chinuch. But we want to remember the Avos Hashem, Avos Torah, and that is, we can raise emotionally secure, happy children, but we also want them to be from and Chassidim, Rishmaim, Lamdanim. Hashem gave us his children, we discussed last time, for a reason. He wants us to raise them to be the way he wants them to be and to serve Hashem, fulfill their purpose here in this world. And we have to make sure we're doing that. So it's necessary that we set that loving foundation, but we also have to be mechanech them. And that starts again with love, but love for what? Love for Yiddishkeit as well. Meaning we can't do half of this. If they see we're excited about Yiddishkeit, but we love Yiddishkeit, Torah, chas v'shalom, more than we care about their feelings, of course, that's a serious problem. But the opposite is true as well, right? If they generally sense that we care about them, but our Yiddishkeit, it's just something we have to do, we might have a good relationship with them, but it's very hard to be mechanech them to appreciate Yiddishkeit. So we want to do both. And just a few short thoughts. The Reb Chaim Vital, the leading student of the Arizal, who teaches us the teachings of the Arizal, teaches us something fascinating about the way mitzvahs have to be done. In short, he says, doing a mitzvah properly, the way it's intended, means doing a mitzvah with joy. Imagine that coins were raining down from heaven as you were doing this mitzvah, right? Like imagine right now you were doing a multi-billion-dollar business deal and how excited you'd be about that, right? Or your husband was doing a multi-billion-dollar business deal and you were just coping with the kids while he did that, right? Like, and your feelings on the topic. It changes everything when you feel like what I'm doing is really worthwhile and valuable. And doing a mitzvah, says Reb Chaim Vital, is, in other words, says the Arizal, that's what it means to do a mitzvah. Yes, technically, we can say I did my checklist, I did my mitzvah, I did the thing. But did I really do it? It's a relationship with Hashem. It's sort of like saying, husband, here's supper. Oh, it's a peanut butter sandwich, but it counts, and whatever. And even if it's a really nice supper, but sort of like just like leaving it there, it's if you reduce a relationship to things I'm supposed to do and I kind of do them half-heartedly, the relationship is not much of a relationship. And when we see Yiddishkeit as a relationship with the Eibishter that we're privileged to have, each mitzvah is an opportunity to connect to him. Each mitzvah is an opportunity to create the home for Hashem that we're privileged to be able to build. It's a schus, it's a privilege, it's a joy, it's so special. So it's like a multi-billion-dollar business deal, every mitzvah that we're doing. And imagine if our children would feel that from us, or if we do that already to some extent, right? If they feel that some more, like imagine to the extent that we can radiate that, what message our children pick up. And specifically, like we said before, it's easier to show emotional energy in the negative things. So most children will pick up from their mothers that Pesach is stressful. Do they know that we love the mitzvahs? I remember at one point, one of my children asked me something like, I don't remember based on what, but like something got them thinking and they thought like, Pesach must be a real drain. Basically, it must be really, it must be pain. So I said, of course not. I mean, it's hard. I'll say it's not hard, but good things come hard. Let's think about the things that we have in our life that are hard. I mean, even, having a child is the biggest bracha and it's such a joy. Is it easy that a baby wakes up at night? No, because we have to work hard, but the fact that something is hard doesn't mean we don't want it, doesn't mean it's bad, right? There's good and there's easy and they're not the same thing. But we kind of need to look inward and say, what am I radiating? Does a child feel like I'm excited? Shabbos is coming, Yom Tov is coming, we're having guests, we're whatever, blah, 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 right? Fill in the blanks, whatever that mitzvah is. Or do I sort of do what I have to do and the only emotional energy they pick up is the negative emotional energy, right? When I'm stressed and overwhelmed, which could be very valid, but what they're basically hearing is the negative feelings. And it's hard not to make that association. So at the same time that we want our children to pick up positive vibes about them, we want them to pick up our positive vibes about Yiddishkeit. I love Torah, I love mitzvahs. We're so privileged to live this life, and it requires conscious thought. It really requires figuring out where I'm going to channel my stress and how I'm going to be expressive in my feelings about mitzvahs. And last point of that as well, one of the ways we help our children do that, besides how we talk and how we give off vibes about Yiddishkeit, is the associations we make for them. So for example, the Seder table, which is the Seder is the night of Yigad Lebincha, transmitting our Messiah, transmitting what it means to be a Yid, the story of Yiddishkeit to our children. Had our Chachamim set it up that it's fascinating, it's exciting, it's got all the things kids want, like staying up playing, it's got all these intriguing things going on. It's right. It's the tension that they get and they say the manish dana. I mean, it's really, like, from a purely logical perspective, we'd call it brilliant. Are definitely beyond just that. So it's a model for us. So the Rebbe points out it here in this example, the Chanasa l'cheder. A child starts learning Torah. We don't say, okay, it's time for you to start learning Torah. All right, now this is what you got to do. No, it's like, you're now learning Torah. We make this whole magical experience, and there's the child's not forgetting that. Even if they were 3, they will remember the honey cake that we engraved, the psukim and the egg and the this and the candies that were rained down from Malach Bachal and the talis that they were in. Exactly, like it's so magical and so beautiful, and it basically impresses upon the child. It's so special that you're starting to learn Torah. The same thing with the upshernish. What's the upshernish? By the time you're old enough to understand, we're teaching you how a Yiddish child looks. You wear bayis, you leave bayis, and we want it to be so memorable that it's so beautiful and special to start looking like a Yid that we make this whole celebration. We're celebrating that you look like a Yid. If we could use that model, there's a reason we have Nesiva Shabbos and whatever we consider treats that are acceptable in our home. That's the time for them. It's exactly where they belong. Shabbos should be associated with good things, and if they don't appreciate meat and their idea is not, whatever, we find something that they can relate to. But a mitzvah should come with positive association. It's not I'm bribing you. I'm not telling you, if you do this mitzvah, I'll give you a treat. I'm saying Yiddishkeit just feels so wonderful. Just like our home feels happy and you make that association, hopefully, Yiddishkeit feels so joyful. Shabbos is a happy time. And it comes along with family bonding, and it's a lot of attention you get at the table. And Yom Tov comes with all kinds of wonderful experiences, and Simchas Beis Sheva and this, and we, whatever we do as a family, on and on. But our mitzvahs come with joy. So in short, to wrap up tonight, really the foundation of everything that we want to give our children starts from a place of love and joy. Ahavas Yisrael, are really investing in them feeling like we really do love and connect and care about them. We are love for Yiddishkeit expressed as joy in Yiddishkeit. And when we work on those, and a child is growing up in a happy, loving home where we're happy and loving to them and to the Torah that we're transmitting, they're in so much better of a place to really just want to absorb that which we want to give them. It's kind of like a natural foundation for everything that comes after. So to be continued, Marissa Hashem, but that's for tonight. All right. Anyone if you have some questions, we'll take a few minutes for that. You're welcome. If you're on Zoom, you're welcome to send a couple questions. I know it's getting late. So yeah, something you wanted to say, go for it.
I'm wondering about the rewards and praise. Because let's say, for example, if I'm gonna tell a kid, I never have to compliment the kid oh yeah, you're playing. I have to compliment them oh yeah, you're cleaning up.
Right,
and
but the truth,
what they pick up is that cleaning is a chore and playing is good.
Right. So yeah, yes, of course. You're saying, why would you compliment a child for something simple like playing?
Meaning, no, I'm saying you don't compliment.
You don't. Right. But the question is, am I complimenting you for playing, or am I complimenting you for playing nicely? In other words, realizing.
I'm wondering, when I'm complimenting a child for cleaning up. What I'm ingraining in them is that cleaning up is a chore.
Right, so if I,
Because I
yes.
don't compliment them.
So if I compliment them only for the things that are difficult, I mean, either I could be saying that's a bad thing, or I could be saying, I know it requires effort. And really the idea is realizing that for a child, most things are an effort. Like no one's born naturally behaving, we'll discuss this more next time, but para adam yivale, Torah says. And it's very helpful for us to recognize that a human being is born like a wild animal. Behaving human is not the natural state, it's the essential state. It's who we're meant to be. That doesn't mean it comes naturally. So literally eating with your fork and spoon is a success for a young child. They have to learn, right? They will naturally just eat like an animal. So that deserves to be complimented. In other words, a child deserves to be recognized for any effort they make towards acting like a mensch. As the Frierdiker Rebbe says in Kol Echenach Adracha, there's a progression, right? There are the goals we set for a young child, basic Menschlichkeit and Derech Eretz and health and eating and cleaning and just taking care of themselves normally and acting normally. We're focusing mostly on that. That doesn't mean at the same time we're not sending messages from the beginning about Kedusha. Of course, that happens at the same time. The point is, what are we, consciously kind of trying to teach them to do? If they get a little older, and we'll teach them to say brachas and whatever, but for a young child, that's a big deal. You ate with a spoon, you ate neatly, you were sharing your toys, you're not fighting as you're playing calmly and not nudging, right? Like all of those are an accomplishment for a 2-year-old or an 8 or whatever age it is. And I think when we kind of look at them as like, you're 7 and you're not, like I recently got this one and it got me thinking. It was an interesting point because I must have done this myself too. It was like, I have, let's say a 7-year-old and, they're not noticing that I need help. Well, is it natural for a 7-year-old to notice that their parents need help and offer it? Like that's quite the leap from growing, being born like this. And I'm the only one in the universe. And my mother, by the way, she's not even a separate human being. She's an extension of me. She's food, which we never grow out of because we could be 40, walk into our mother's house and open the pantry and the refrigerator. You're born like that and the other person's just there to serve my needs. And by the time they're 7, they should naturally just be expected to, of course, notice by themselves that mommy's stressed out and needs help. I mean, that's like really quite an expectation we have, but we do that a lot, I think. We just like, when are you just going to be perfect? Like, why should they be? Every step they've made towards that, and it doesn't matter what other kids their age are doing. It's like, if to this child, the fact that someone else outgrew tantrums at 3, that's great. The child still hasn't mastered it. So if they've made a step towards that, that's an accomplishment, right? So if right now, they were having a hard time, for example, keeping themselves entertained quietly for a few minutes, and right now they've learned to do that and not be as dependent and nudgy on mom. So that's an accomplishment, and I think we never lose out by giving our children credit for the things that they're putting some sort of effort in, as opposed to setting the bar higher and being like, well, I'm not going to compliment you until you reach there's no harm. If it's true, if you recognize that it's something the child deserves some sort of credit for, I don't think we ever lose out.
Where does it say that a child?
Para adam yivaled. Let me look it up. I'm sorry. I don't offhand.
That's like
Para. Yeah, let me look it up. I'm sorry, I don't offhand remember exactly where it's from. I'll get it to you. You can look it up. Para, Pei, Reish, Aleph. And I think just realizing that we can give, instead of, sometimes we think like, oh no, we're putting our children down. No, we're actually giving them a lot more credit when we realize that. Because everything kind of, like, wow, they deserve credit for any human behavior, any mental behavior.
Like kids that are calm, it's like literally
Precisely. It's 100%. And that's so children are born calm. It's a big deal. Yes. And I think a big part of the challenge of parenting is this sense of like, they should be acting so much better than they are. And like, how come it's so difficult? And wait, like, no, it's a miracle when it is. And if your child sort of just naturally picks up appropriate behavior or is naturally self-regulating and entertains themselves and whatever, just meets their milestones, does what they need to do without major intervention, like that's a bracha, right? It's a bracha. So Chava was given the opposite of a bracha, that raising children will not come easy. The children are the bracha, but the raising them, as long as we're in Golos, doesn't come that way. And we should expect that everything comes with effort and that it's messy and it's complicated and like, oh, this one easy, nice, as opposed to we get so frustrated from our expectations of it's supposed to just naturally happen. And how come I have to actually teach my child how to eat neatly and not make a mess? Because children aren't naturally born that way. So if we just assume we're gonna have to teach them everything, and we say, wow, that's so nice, the child just picked it up naturally or picked it up from their older sibling, like, great, that's fantastic, as opposed to getting older, like, well, how come you don't know this? Well, why should they know this, Absolutely.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Sometimes it's also like, what about the timing when you do it? Like, I know that this whole idea of the how to grow and energizing positivity, I think for me also, it's like, it really is a paradigm shift because kids are not used to hearing all the excited voice about you're actually just playing nicely now. We're going to give energy to that. I know with my kids sometimes, as soon as I say it, let's say I try to do it, they're just like, they're like, look at me. So one might say, brownies, or like the other one might just be like, oh, there's mommy. Oh, come. Like they'll just do something else. So sometimes I'm just thinking, not that I would do it, but it's also be careful sometimes.
For sure, when we radically change what we're doing, yes, our kids will be thrown off guard. But the same thing will happen anywhere in a marriage. If we start suddenly going like, okay, I'm going to stop all my criticism. I'm right now just going to start focusing. I'm going to start like, yes, our spouse might also look at us like, what's up? What am I missing? Yes, but if we don't get thrown off by that and we just persist, eventually they're like, oh, okay, nice change. I'm happy. And I think instead of getting like insecure, which naturally can happen of like, oh no, I'm going to ruin it. No, yes, it's normal that the other person is going to be surprised that I'm relating differently. But as soon as they pick up that I'm for real and I'm not playing games with them, it should go well.
Right.
Right. You're saying we don't want to interrupt when they're doing good things by positive behavior, positive comments. Yes, for sure. Well, I guess the point to doing it right then is if we think something might change. If we anticipate that there might be a fight in a few moments, we could prevent that by making positive comments. Otherwise, yes, it could come later. We could always strategize how to do it, but we want to ask ourselves at the end of the day, like, how many positive things did my child actually hear? Not I thought it in my head and I imagined I would have said it. Exactly, right? So like, whatever, say it when it comes, because
wondering, like, let's say.
one second, there's a question here. You mentioned how should they know how to do this? What if you constantly try to teach them not to do something and they continue doing it after you've been teaching them not to do something? Okay, great question. So sometimes we think like, wait, you should know this. You should know that we don't do this. I've told you 675 times, okay? What? So, again, step one, I think, is going back to the which I recommend learning. It's not easy reading, it's learning, but there is a wonderful translation from Kahas on it. The Frierdiker Rebbe goes extensively into understanding a child's nature. Every child is different, and there could be something that's not a big deal for us and is a really big deal for them. And sometimes we need to learn to understand that. Like, guess what? If we've said something 675 times and our child's not doing it, maybe we should stop a little before that many times and ask, why not? Like, a child wants to please us, so what must be so difficult? There are children with sensory issues, overload, that things really are hard for them. I have one child who just recently started expressing what's going on. And like, even though I knew it, you tell yourself like, oh, they must have this or whatever. The child says it and it's like, ouch. So this child tells me when a lot of times during supper, the other kinderlach are making so much noise and it gives me a headache. Like, literally expressed it like that. And you're like, wait, what the child's experiencing in their hearing, in their brain is different than what I'm experiencing. And I think it should be no big deal to just behave or be calm at supper time. For the child, it's really overload. Or like when you pick me up that way, it feels like needles poking into me. You know, if a child expresses that, it's like, wait, like, what if I felt like things were poking into me? I mean, you know, it'd be a different story. So we kind of approach them as like, you're me, and I can handle it, or so-and-so can handle it, and you can't, right? And we're coming across pretty judgmental. And often we don't realize, like, if I've told them 1.5 million times, maybe there's a reason it's hard. Because again, the child, as the Rebbe says, the dvarim habilti ritzuyim, the things we don't want, are just a davar zar shenidbak mibachutz. There's something external that's getting stuck. The child's getting stuck somewhere, but really from the etzem mitzias, the essence of a yid, ein lo shaychas klal and yana bilti ritzuyim. A child's in a shalom. They want to do the right thing. Of course, they would rather please us. Like, why would they want to misbehave? So maybe they have a difficulty, or maybe they're acting out looking for attention. And yes, attention's a real need. So maybe I need to give them more positive attention. They shouldn't feel the need to, you know, like they say, abiyah fmir. They're sort of like, you know, when someone wants attention, it's like, I'll take negative attention over no attention, right? Whatever, even if you scream at me, I'll take it. It's better than nothing. You know, is there something practical that's difficult for them? Is there a skill they don't have? They're messy. You know, a child who's making a mess, maybe they know they're supposed to eat neatly. Maybe they just don't have the fine motor skills or the control or the ability to sit still in their chair. And like, it's hard for them. So they could know from today to tomorrow, which might be difficult. And we're not helping them by constantly criticizing them about it. So like, really, I think that needs to give us pause if we're saying something so many times and it's not working. And if anything, that's exactly where the positive reinforcement works, because like the child's having difficulty. So help them get the motivation to overcome it. Notice when they're doing something, at least somewhat in that regard, that's helpful, because they know. It's not like they don't know. They clearly know. What? We might. And if we can't figure out what it is, then I think we never go wrong emphasizing the positive. Meaning, let's say I can't figure out why you're.
Usually you can see if you observe a lot of time. Why is this kid always getting the day? Why?
Right.
Right before you go on your computer, he's not feeling it. We didn't have enough money at home. Whatever it is, you'll usually see that as like a link between something.
Absolutely. Yes.
They don't just do things unless there's like a major issue or something. They don't just like
right, which is exactly the whole concept of half an hour day of chinuch. There's a lot to think about, and sometimes it requires taking some time to reflect and bouncing it off with our spouse. It could be, and we really need, yes, but there's something chronic, there is something daily, not everything we need to make a whole big tzimus about. Sometimes the best thing we could do is pretend, you know, we're blind and deaf and we didn't see it if it's a one-time thing, but I'm saying something regular. Yeah, we need to take our half an hour day of chinuch and think like, wait, what's going on with this child? What's not working? And it's not, this is a bad child that doesn't want to behave. Like, why aren't they getting it? It's like, okay, they're clearly having difficulty. Why might they be having difficulty? Can I do anything about it? Not everything has a neat solution. Maybe there's something I could do, but at the very minimum, regardless of whatever I'm going to do to help them with their difficulty, I can always help, no matter how hard it is for them, by pointing out the positive, because what that gives a child is the motivation to overcome the difficulty. Like, it's really hard for me, but it feels so good to get that positive reinforcement for doing the right thing that I kind of just get the motivation to overcome it. In other words, it's not like I need to solve all the problems. I should try. I mean, I should try to figure out how to help my children. But even if I haven't figured it all out yet and gotten some fancy diagnosis and treatment and blah, 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 I could just say, okay, let's just help them by emphasizing the positive and not constantly beating them down. Because, you know, we know what they say about insanity, right? Like, if you're doing the same thing 1 million times, it's not working, like, just sort of try the other one. And just letting go, that gets to the core of the question, is letting go of these expectations. You should be perfect. You should know already. You should, and that's what the child senses, is this personal frustration. I'm so sick and tired of having to tell you, and how many times could I, and what, you know, we take it personally, and how dare you, and don't you know how hard I worked, and can't you just get into bed, and, you know, and if it becomes about us, and we really lost the chinuch train completely. So, you know, try not to take it personally, but saying, okay, we have a problem. Clearly we're not getting somewhere. So let's deal with the problem. Let's figure out how to help this child, or how to do use a different strategy, but mixing the frustration out of it, which is of course easier said than done, but it is probably the thing that stands in our way the most.
What
You know,
about
this you
saying
should.
that they know they shouldn't be doing, like they know that they're big enough to know that they shouldn't put markers and color the wall.
So we will get to next
It's not a
time
problem.
discipline. And that's why, there are two wings. If all we had was this, we'd have a problem. And that is, if you just listen to tonight, you might, think I believe things that I don't. So there's another half to the story that is equally important. And that's called the child needs boundaries and needs discipline, needs to learn Kabbalah soil, and there are repercussions sometimes to what you do. We will have to get to that. For sure, there are ways to teach a child and kind of help them overcome, like we said, small daicha, their tendencies that are not positive. But we're just saying that the first step we want to try that usually avoids lots of the problems. And even when we do have to discipline them, if it's coming on a foundation of positivity and love, is going to come across a lot better than if they feel like you're out to get me because you did this or you did that, as opposed to like, I know, okay, I know that's what happens, when you play with markers. I know markers just, get taken away or whatever is going to happen. But they can handle that if the foundation is there first. So we're not saying this is the end of the story, but just, one thing at a time. Is giving them excuses a good thing? I'm pretty sure it's not. Right. So what does it say? Akol b'dei shamayim chutz miyiras shamayim. Meaning, yes, nothing is in our control in terms of what happens to us, but we do have absolute control over one thing, and that is our choices. And from the beginning, we want to teach our children. Again, more on that next time, Ritz Hashem, but you always have control over the choices you make, and you can choose the Yetzer Hara or the Yetzer Tov, and I believe you will choose B'charta B'chaim. Right, but we don't have to actually excuse them and make it okay. We could just sort of preempt it and realize they're tired and just ignore what's happening. Like, right, for sure. Yeah, right, but that's not an excuse. In the sense, more like realize that when you get tired, it gets a lot harder for you to do this, and this ends up happening. So the smart choice, and maybe that would be your choice, because maybe sometimes you almost lose your free choice at some point. Your choice is to start noticing when this or that and do whatever so that you can then behave. Meaning it's more focused on like, what can you control that you can choose, as opposed to letting them off the hook. I'm not looking to teach you that you can use excuses and let off the hook for what you do. I'm looking to help you do whatever you need to do so that you can make the right choice. And really just kind of putting the responsibility on them, but in a way that's doable and manageable. But definitely what love does not mean is kind of making excuses for them and letting them away with it.
Like you are a child, like two opposites. Like one, we expect nothing from them because we were born to act like an animal and we have to teach everything. But on the other hand, we
believe they can be kind of good.
Potentially, really they're neshama, we want to do good, they
Right.
want to do this.
That's an excellent question, that we're really viewing our child in two opposite ways. And the answer to that, I think, is Tanya. Is realizing that we're not crazy and they're not crazy. There are two nefashos. So the bad behavior is always the Yetzer Hara's fault. It's always the fault of the Nefesh HaBahamis. It's not, how could it happen? Well, if you have a Nefesh HaBahamis, that could happen. But I believe, since you have a Nefesh HaLekis, that you're capable of transcending that in incredible ways and living totally differently. So it's not like you're two crazy, opposite, schizophrenic people. It's like you have two very different sides of you. This side is extremely this, right? It is an animal, it's Nefesh HaBahamis, but this side of you is totally that, and I'm going to choose which one to emphasize, right? So I'm not going to be shocked by your Nefesh HaBahamis behavior. I'm just going to believe that you absolutely can transcend that you want to transcend that, and that I'm here to help you do that, right? But that's very different than sort of, how could you? Like, I get how could you, but I know you don't really want to be that nefesh. And really think everything goes to that core. Really understand the concept of two nefashos. is so freeing for ourselves, for our children, for everybody. Because otherwise, yeah, we start wondering like, wait, which one is it?
I just have a technical question on that, but it's like two parts, two opposites. That the other represents that the mental has come in about. So now on the one hand, like how it's free in a way that you tell that like this, just remind yourself that they're making that honest, and so that's a strong part. So that's gonna happen often. Then how can we like expect them to do the right thing?
It was a fascinating question. The idea of the nefesh kiss coming in for our bas mitzvah, into how we can expect more before. Briefly, let's just say there's the concept of zelu umasa, that Hashem creates zelu umasa, whatever advantage there is in ruchnius comes, with the opposite advantage, like kind of everything is always left equal. The challenge that children have, which in plain English, the concept of the nefesh kiss coming in later is really expressed, and you see it, the gashmi is coming out in the sense that it's harder for them to gain control over themselves, right? What science talks about, whatever the prefrontal cortex or whatever it is, that, right, that like there are different parts of your brain, and the part of yourself that's rational and can control your emotions, develops as you get older. What? Right, not till it's exactly not right, but it's not completed then. And the same thing, chinuch goes to, like we said, till 24. I mean, right, there's stages in that, but like at a certain point, Torah says, we assume you have enough capability of controlling yourself to, do what you have to do, type of thing. Not to be a tzaddik, right? So on the one hand, that's true, that there is that progression. It takes time for them to be able, like, it's like, how could my whatever number age child be throwing a tantrum? Because like they're still trying to gain control over themselves. It's hard. But that chisaron, that challenge children have, is offset by the fact that they are also more pure. They're less tainted, meaning their nefesh Bahamas is also not as developed. It's raw, but it's not as fed. There's an expression, sort of a joke amongst chassidim of sort of, you reach another birthday. It's a men's joke, I guess, but you get like, let's say to 30 or 40, and it's like, you're greber, you're a year courser. You've spent another year eating shalom and whatever, ice cream and whatever the case, fill in the blanks of generations or, wherever you live. But, it's another year of indulging in yourself, and you become more megusham. So the nefesh Bahamas, even as our nefesh lakis gets stronger and we get older, nefesh Bahamas also gets stronger. That's the way it works. And in children, yes, the nefesh lakis is less developed, but the nefesh Bahamas is also less developed. So their nefesh lakis, maybe they don't have as much control over themselves, but it's purer. It's less tainted. They don't have all the hangups and the stuff. Like if Mora said and Rebbe said that it's a mitzvah, like it just is. I mean, I still remember when one of my children came home, maybe first grade or something, with telling another child, do you know what happens if you prepare negelwasser before you go to sleep? It helps you have yiras shamayim. So the other kid's looking at him going, what's yiras shamayim? Yiras shamayim means that you'll like want to do the mitzvahs. And we're like, with all the passion of like, hello, it's worth doing this. You're going to get more yiras shamayim if you prepare your negelwasser before you go to sleep. I mean, halavai, that my level of inspiration would be anywhere near that, but the child, you said it, and it's MS, and it's just, and my 2-year-old is going, good nacht, Rebbe, Mashiach now. Like you might say, oh, to a little kid, they don't even know what they're saying or whatever, right? But it reflects a truth, and that is the MS is just MS, and it's uncomplicated. So, kind of everything comes with its own, and that's why he says that the pure breath, and it's not tainted by hate, by sin, and they're pure, and what the words that they say are pure, their Torah is pure. Like it has tremendous advantage. So we can focus on the chesar, and that's true. And that's what we say, sort of like when we're looking to understand them, we focus on the aspect of like, yes, it's understandable that they made these mistakes. That's what children do because their nefesh lakis is less kind of in a position to control their actions, but it itself is in a pure, less tainted state.
I always thought that sun comes in a broken rest.
Right, it's progressively, for sure, 100%. It's just less, yeah. It progressively. Yeah, they have it, and it's even if it's less strong in its ability to control them. Again, it's still pure. It's still less covered up. There's less stuff on it. So it kind of, it outweighs that. And whatever we notice and whatever we're going to emphasize, that's, right. We see them, we'll talk about Sivas Hashem, but when we see them as a soldier in Sivas Hashem, and everything else like that, that's what we're going to see coming out of them, is that kind of the pure state. But when they misbehave, it's important to remember, like, okay, Ma'achshalat Alalev is not something we can fully expect all the time of a child. It's understandable that they're not there. Like, we can just help them and encourage them instead of getting disappointed and frustrated or whatever. All right. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, exactly. Sure.
So the big 3 box,